Welcome back to Decoded by Mo. Most of the time on this podcast, I'm talking about the future, about AI, about strategy, about what's coming next. But this time, I've decided to change gear and go in reverse. In today's episode, you won't hear me talk much about AI and how it's evolving or taking our jobs or shaping us. Because if AI really is the next great transformation, then the best way to understand where we're heading is to first understand where we've been. Because every technology since fire has reshaped not only what we do, but who we are. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the stories of history where I try to decode how we got here and where we're heading. I believe that technology has always reshaped us, not just our tools, but our bodies and minds. Fire changed our jaws and our brains. Farming changed our spines and our diets. Factories bent workers over machines and filled lungs with soot. And today, doctors talk about tech neck, the chronic strain we carry from staring down at phones and laptops. Even in subtle ways, our physiology keeps bending to the tools we create. That's why I want to go back into history. Not history as a list of battles and dates, but history as a story of change. Because within stories, myth, art, wars, religion, and technology, we can see how each age reshaped us our psychology, our physiology, and our sense of meaning. And this brings me to a word I'll return to again and again, which is resilience. Resilience has always been the hidden backbone of human survival. It has meant different things in different times mobility, storage, endurance, and authenticity. But each time it defined not only how we survived, but who we became. So, in the first episode of my new trilogy, I'll start from the beginning, in the extractive age when humans lived as hunters and gatherers, surviving directly from the land. Because AI may feel new, but the story of technology reshaping humanity began the moment we picked up our first tool. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived as hunter gatherers. Small groups, rarely more than a few dozen, moved within seasons. They hunted animals, fished rivers and coasts, gathered roots, berries, nuts, and herbs. It's tempting to call this life primitive, but that's misleading. Survival in this world required incredible sophistication. A hunter in Kalahari could track an antelope across empty sand, reading faint prints and broken twigs like a book. An Inuit leader in the Arctic could build an igloo in minutes, cutting blocks of snow at the perfect angle. In the Amazon, gatherers could identify hundreds of plants, which ones fed, which ones healed, and which ones killed. This wasn't luck, it was knowledge carried across generations. These societies may not have had ledgers or coins, but they had libraries of memory. When rains would come, which rivers flooded, or which stars guided migration. Their accounting wasn't numbers on tablets. It was oral agreements reinforced by ritual and kinship. Who got what share of the hunt, who tended the fire, who cared for the children. All of this was organized, remembered, and enforced. Different from our systems, but not less real. At first glance, it looks simple. Small groups moving across landscapes, surviving day to day. But if you look closer, this was the age that set the foundations for everything that followed. It's here we see the first technologies fire, stone tools, language, ritual, and the first ways human adapted resilience. Fire was more than warmth and protection. It was a physiological revolution. By cooking food, humans unlocked more calories, softened tough fibers, and reduced disease. This changed digestion, jaw structure, or even brain growth. Our bodies became what they are today because of fire. But fire was also social, a center for stories, ritual, and myth. Around firelight, humans told tales of ancestors, gods, and monsters. It was the first platform, not digital, but communal, where information was shared and identities formed. Resilience here meant mastering the flame, learning to control, transport, and preserve it. A tribe without fire was vulnerable. A tribe with fire thrived. Stone tools were equally transformative. They extended the body. a sharp edge replacing a tooth, a spear replacing a claw. But they also required teaching. You couldn't simply guess how to knap a flint. Elders demonstrated, an apprentice copied. This was education before schools, apprenticeship and memory. Knowledge wasn't written down, it was stored in people. Myth, songs, and dance encoded geography, seasons, and survival techniques. Resilience meant education as embodied learning. Knowledge wasn't abstract, it was tied to muscle memory, rhythm, and repetition. Early humans didn't just make tools, they made art, because art, even then, wasn't decoration. It was survival, it was teaching, it was meaning. Take the cave paintings at Lascaux in France, dating back almost 17,000 years ago. Deep inside, humans painted bison, deer, and horses. Some scholars believe they were teaching tools, showing younger hunters the forms of animals, their movements, and the points to strike. Others think they were rituals connecting the tribe to hunt spiritually. Either way, they were value creation. They stored knowledge, they created collective memory, and they turned survival skills into visual stories that outlived the moment. And the Venus figurines carved across Europe, tens of thousands of years ago, which are small statues of women with exaggerated features. Fertility symbols, maybe, religious icons, possibly, we don't know, but they tell us that humans already attached the value to symbols of life, continuity, and abundance. Art then was an early form of resilience. It encoded lessons, values, and hopes into forms that could be remembered, repeated, and shared. But humans also told stories, and stories carried survival lessons across generations. In West Africa, people told tales of Anansi the Spider, the trickster who survived not through strength, but through cunning. Anansi's wit turned impossible odds into victories. His stories, later carried across the Atlantic with enslaved Africans, taught that intelligence and creativity were as valuable as brute force. In the extractive economy, this was true everywhere. Survival depended on knowing more, not on having more. Along the Pacific Northwest, another tale was told of a raven stealing the sun. The world, they said, was once in darkness. The raven, clever and persistent, stole the sun from a selfish chief and released it to humanity. The story speaks of light, but also of resilience. Survival required seizing knowledge and sharing it with the tribe. In Australia, the Aboriginal songlines were not just myth but maps. Stories sung across the land encoded geography, where to find waterholes, how to cross deserts, or sometimes how to navigate vast distances. A child who learned the songs inherited not culture but survival itself. Education was not a classroom, it was melody. In Japan, the myth of Amaterasu, the sun goddess, told of world plunged into darkness when she hid away in grief. Only by the community effort and ritual did the gods lure her back, restoring light. Again, the story is about resilience. Darkness can be overcome if a community works together. These myths remind us that even in the extractive age, humans weren't only surviving, they were building systems of knowledge, ethics, and meaning. They were asking, who gets light? Who holds power? How do we endure? Resilience wasn't only physical, it was intellectual and cultural. Healing was part of this economy too. Shamans and herbalists carried knowledge of plants, rituals, and trance states that acted as early medicine. In South America, coca leaves were chewed to fight fatigue at high altitude. In Asia, willow bark was used to ease pain, the root of what would later become aspirin. Surgery itself appeared early. Pierced skulls show that people practiced cranial surgery thousands of years ago, sometimes with patients surviving. The last ice age dictated where humans could live, what they could eat, how far they could travel. When glaciers receded, new fertile valleys opened. When they advanced, tribes moved or perished. Geography even redirected humanity's path entirely. The Bering Land Bridge, once connecting Siberia to Alaska, allowed humans to migrate into the Americas. Without it, whole continents would have remained untouched. So even in this early extractive age, geography shaped opportunity, risk, and value. In small groups, power belonged to those with rare skills: the best hunter, the elder who remembered past droughts, the shaman who interpreted dreams and rituals. But conflict existed too. Not global wars, but clashes over hunting grounds, rivers, caves. A tribe that lost access to a waterhole could collapse. Resilience sometimes meant defending what you had, and sometimes meant moving on. Technology also reshaped resilience. The first controlled fire turned raw meat into nourishment, darkness into safety. Stone tools made hunting more efficient. Arrows extended reach. Clothing stitched from animal skin allowed survival in colder climates. The earliest musical instruments, flutes carved from bone, gave rhythm to ritual and helped bind communities through sound. Each innovation shifted the balance of survival. Each was an upgrade in resilience. So, did they have accounting? Not in the way we imagine. No ledger, no coins, but they had systems. A hunt required trackers, hunters, butchers, firekeepers. The division of meat wasn't random, it was remembered and enforced. That was accounting. Not numbers on a page, but responsibilities, relationships, and ritual. It kept the group resilient. For all its sophistication, this way of life had one limitation: it was vulnerable. Herds moved, rivers dried, storms came. But then also came agriculture and farming. Agriculture promised something new: stability. You plant the seeds, you tend to them, and you harvest them. Farming tied humans to the land, and in that rootedness, something extraordinary began: villages, surplus, temples, and cities. The economy was about to transform forever. The magic of farming was not that it produced food. Humans had always found food. The magic was that farming produced surplus. If you planted a field of barley, you harvested far more than you need immediately. That extra could be stored. It could feed children through winter. It could be traded. It could support people who weren't farming at all. And with the surplus came specialization. For the first time, entire groups could dedicate themselves to crafts, to metalwork, to pottery, to building, or to priesthood. Surplus allowed humans to invent professions. But surplus also allowed inequality. Once food could be stored, it could be guarded, controlled, and taxed. The person who watched over the granary suddenly held power over those who needed it. Wealth shifted from what could you grow with your hands to what you could control with authority. Religion stepped into this moment, not as something separate from the economy, but at its very core. In Mesopotamia, temples were not just houses of gods. They were granaries, warehouses, and banks. Farmers brought a portion of their harvest as offerings. Priests stored it, recorded it, and redistributed it. Religion gave legitimacy to this arrangement. Handing over your grain wasn't just paying tax, it was participating in cosmic balance. In Egypt, the pharaoh was seen not just as a ruler, but as a god. His divine power was tied to the Nile. If the river flooded on time, crops grew and people ate. If it failed, it was a cosmic crisis. Taxes flowed into massive state granaries, feeding armies and laborers who built pyramids that still stand today. In China, the mandate of heaven framed the legitimacy of rulers. A dynasty was believed to hold heaven's favor only as long as it kept order and prosperity. If floods, droughts, or famines came, people believed heaven had withdrawn its mandate and rebellion was justified. Resilience here meant more than food. It meant harmony between the human and the divine. And in the Maya world, the Popol Vuh, which is the sacred text of the Maya in Central America, mentioned that, like humans, being created from maize, not clay, not stone, but corn. Farming wasn't just survival, it was the very material of humanity. Resilience meant caring for maize as sacred. Across these traditions, agriculture and belief intertwined. Farming was not just a technique, it was identity, culture, and legitimacy. And as societies grew larger, they needed more than myth to manage disputes. They needed rules. And so came the first written laws. The Code of Hammurabi, carved in Babylon around 1750 BCE, laid out economic principles we'd still recognize today: wages for workers, rules for merchants, limits on interest rates, even standards for accountability. If a builder's house collapsed and killed the owner, the builder could be executed. Law made value predictable. It turned exchanges into obligations enforceable by the state, not just by memory or kinship. In a sense, it was the first large scale operating system for society. Education also transformed. In Mesopotamia, scribal schools trained boys, and almost only boys, to write on clay tablets, learning cuneiform for record keeping. In Egypt, young scribes memorized hieroglyphics and arithmetic to manage harvests and taxes. In China, Confucian classics shaped generations of administrators who would manage dynasties. Among the Maya, astronomer priests studied the skies, linking calendars to agriculture and ritual. Knowledge was narrowing. Where once every child learned survival from elders, now only elites learned writing, astronomy, or law. Education became a tool of power and inequality. And agriculture didn't just feed people, it allowed them to dream bigger. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, which are massive step temples, rose above city skylines. The pyramids of Egypt, built with millions of stone blocks, demanded decades of labor. The palaces of Knossos in Crete were painted with frescoes of bulls, dolphins, and dancers, symbols of prosperity from farming and trade. In the Indus Valley, artisans carved intricate seals, their motifs suggesting order, commerce, and a belief in abundance. In the Americas, the Olmecs raised colossal stone heads, guardians carved from agricultural wealth. These structures weren't only spiritual, they were economic symbols. They said we have so much surplus that we can feed thousands of workers who do nothing but build. Even writing itself began as an economic art. The first cuneiform tablets weren't poems. They were ledgers of grain, sheep, and oil. The first scribes were accountants, and in a way, the first artists of bureaucracy. Art moved from hidden caves to monumental landscapes, from survival sketches to eternal symbols of wealth and meaning. But wealth created conflict. In the agricultural age, wars were not about chasing herds. They were about land and water. Mesopotamian cities fought bitterly over irrigation canals. Control of a single waterway could mean life or death for thousands. Egypt built armies not only to defend its fertile Nile Valley, but to expand beyond it. In China, dynasties rose and fell with their ability to control fertile river basins like the Yellow River. A, a river both life giving and devastating, flooding catastrophically, even enough to earn the name China's Sorrow. For the first time, humans killed each other not just for survival, but for control of systems that produced surplus. Geography shaped who thrived and who struggled. The Fertile Crescent had wild wheat, barley, goats, and sheep ready to be domesticated. Egypt had the Nile, flooding predictably each year and replenishing the soil. China had Loess Rich River, valleys perfect for the rice and millet. But geography could also undo civilizations. The Mayan civilization, for example, thrived for centuries. They built magnificent cities deep in the jungles of Central America. They mastered agricultures with terracing and reservoirs. But prolonged drought, worsened by deforestation, led to famine and political breakdown. Cities were abundant, the societies fragmented. Agriculture created stability, but it also created fragility. Depend too much on one crop, one river, one climate, and resilience could vanish overnight. In China, rice cultivation shaped not just the economy, but the entire structure of the state. Rice farming required irrigation canals, coordinated planting, and synchronized harvests. Villages had to cooperate at a scale far larger than hunting bands. Over centuries, this need for coordination gave rise to bureaucracies, administrators who organized labor, managed water, and collected grain. Later, this bureaucracy formalized into one of the world's first civil service systems. Officials were selected through exams, managing everything from taxes to public works. It all began with demands of rice. Farming didn't just feed China, it created the framework of a resilient state that could govern millions. And here we come back to resilience. Agriculture made societies resilient against scarcity in some ways. They could produce food on demand, store it, and settle permanently. But it also made them fragile. Hunter gatherers could move when the environment shifted. Farmers were trapped in a place. A failed harvest meant famine. An invading army that seized fields could starve an entire city. Resilience shifted from mobility and flexibility to stability and storage, and that shift brought both prosperity and peril. Out of surplus, belief and conflict came empires. Mesopotamia produced Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. Egypt rose with its pharaohs, China unified under dynasties. The Maya and Aztec built temple cities in the Americas. Each built system designed not just to strive, but to endure. Empires taxed harvests, stored grain, built armies, and expanded to secure new fertile lands. They wrapped this economic machinery in legitimacy, divine kingship, priestly rituals, monumental art. Empires were resilience scaled up, an attempt to make human systems as eternal as the rivers that fed them. Some lasted for centuries, others crumbled in decades. But we should be careful not to romanticize this revolution. For many people, agriculture meant harder lives. Hunter gatherers often had varied diets and more leisure time. Early farmers worked longer hours, ate less diverse food, and suffered more disease. Archaeologists find skeletons with stunted growth, malnutrition, and arthritis from repetitive labor. So while agriculture enabled civilization, it also created inequality, exploitation, and dependence. Value creation became more efficient, but also more unequal. By the later agricultural age, trade routes stretched across continents. The Silk Road carried silk, horses, spices, glass, and ideas between China, India, Persia, and Rome. Egyptian grain fed Rome's growing population. Gold from Africa flowed north. Spices from Southeast Asia flowed west. Agriculture provided the foundation, but trade expanded its reach. Resilience was no longer only local. A failed harvest in one region could be offset by imports from another. But the same connections also meant that shocks could ripple across borders. And myths continued to remind people of their dependence on cycles of nature. In Greece, the story of Demeter and Persephone explained the seasons. The goddess mourning her daughter brought winter, her return brought spring. In Egypt, the death and rebirth of Osiris symbolized the grain buried in the soil and rising again. These myths weren't just poetry, they were explanations of agricultural resilience, the fragility of harvest, the hope of renewal. But in 1453, the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople. The overland routes to Asia became difficult, expensive, and politically blocked. Europe faced a choice: shrink inward or find new path. And so began the Age of Discovery. Portuguese sailors edged down to the coast of Africa, learning winds and currents. Vasco da Gama eventually reached India by sea, unlocking a direct spice route. Columbus sailed west, stumbling upon the Americas while searching for Asia. The oceans became highways of value. Whoever mastered them could dominate the world. The ruling idea of 1500s and 1600s was mercantilism. Nations believed wealth was finite, like a pie, where one slice gained meant another slice lost. To grow powerful, you had to hoard gold and silver and run trade surpluses. Colonies became resource engines. Spain extracted silver from Peru and Mexico in staggering quantities. Portugal claimed Brazil. The Dutch seized the Spice Islands, and Britain began to expand across the seas. This wasn't free trade, it was controlled trade, enforced by fleets and cannons. Colonies shipped raw material to the mother country, Finished goods flowed back. Every route, every port, every harbor was a prize. Out of the competition emerged something revolutionary: the Joint Stock Company. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company was founded. Citizens could buy shares. Risks and profits were spread among many investors. Suddenly, it wasn't only kings who financed voyages, ordinary merchants could pool capital. The company grew so powerful it acted like a state, building forts, minting coins, and maintaining its armies. At its height, it was arguably more influential than Dutch government itself. This was the beginning of modern capitalism, the idea that value could be scaled by investment, organization, and networks of trust. History in this era is filled with dramatic shifts in fortune. Spain, flush with silver from the Americas, seemed unstoppable in the 1500s, but too much silver caused inflation. Prices soared, debts grew, and Spain's wealth eroded as quickly as it had arrived. The very treasure that made it rich also weakened it. Venice, once dominant in Mediterranean trade, lost its edge when ocean routes bypassed its ports. Its wealth shrank, its palaces faded, and it became a relic of an earlier system. Meanwhile, the Dutch and then the British rose by mastering sea power, finance, and global trade. Amsterdam's stock exchange became the beating heart of European commerce, later rivaled by London. Resilience in this age wasn't about fields or rivers. It was about routes, fleets, and financial systems. And those who adapted thrived. Those who clung to old monopolies collapsed. This was also an age of relentless conflict. Wars were fought not only over land but over trade routes and colonies. The Anglo-Dutch Wars in the 1600s were as much as about shipping lanes as territory. The Spanish Armada in 1588 was about controlling flows of treasure and influence. Later, Britain and France clashed repeatedly in global conflicts that stretched from Europe to the Americas to Asia. For the first time, wars became truly worldwide because value had become global. I cannot tell this story without acknowledging the darker side. The global trade system of Mercantile Age was built not only on spices and silver, but on slavery. Millions of Africans were transported across the Atlantic in brutal conditions to work plantations in the Americas. Sugar, cotton, and tobacco, the commodities that enriched Europe, were produced by enslaved labor. Here, resilience meant survival under oppression. Entire cultures were torn apart, but the new ones also formed mixing traditions, languages, and faith across continents. It is a reminder that value creation in one part of the world often come at a devastating cost in another. But mercantile expansion wasn't only about gold and conquest. It was also about ideas, culture, and exchange. In West Africa, the Mali Empire thrived under Mansa Musa, often called the richest man who ever lived. His pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 was legendary. So much gold was given away along his route that it caused inflation in Cairo for years. His wealth came from trade, but his story became myth, a symbol of abundance, and its dangers. In Greece, long before the figure of Odysseus embodied the merchant spirit, he was a sailor, a trickster, a trader of words as much as goods. His epic voyage can be read not only as war's aftermath, but as a parable of risk, cunning, and endurance in the world of uncertain seas. And in the Arab world, tales of Sinbad the sailor in the Thousand and One Nights captured the wonder and peril of maritime trade. Islands of treasure, storms, monsters, shipwrecks. The merchant's life was both fortune and danger. These stories traveled as widely as the merchants themselves, embedding in culture the idea that resilience in trade was as much as about courage and adaptability as profit. Technology made this world possible. The caravel, a ship designed with triangular sails, allowed sailors to tack against the wind. The compass and improved maps guided navigation across open seas. Gunpowder and cannons turned ships into floating fortresses. These tools made long-distance trade possible, but they also militarized it. Trade and war became inseparable. And technology created new social spaces. Coffee houses in Istanbul, London, and Paris became hubs of information, where merchants exchanged news, brokers struck deals, and writers debated politics. Some historians call them the Internet of Enlightenment. Value was no longer only in goods, it was in information, culture, and networks of trust. The Renaissance, fueled by wealth from trade, saw merchants like Medici commission art, sculpture, and architecture as displays of value. Algebra came from Arabic scholars, astronomy from Persia, printing from China. Cultures intertwined in ways that reshaped how humans thought and created. What did resilience mean in this era? For nations, it meant securing colonies, fleets, and gold reserves. For merchants, it meant diversifying ventures, investing in ships, sharing risk. For individuals, it meant adapting to rapid change. New foods, new markets, new rulers. Those who recognized the shift from local to global value creation could ride the wave. Those who failed, like Venice, clinging into older roots, or Spain drowning in silver, faded. Resilience had become global, and with it, value creation was no longer tied to the soil, but to the seas. By the 1700s, the groundwork was laid for yet another transformation: the accumulation of capital, the rise of corporation, the spread of global trade, all created the conditions for the Industrial Revolution. Coal and steam, machines and factories would soon redefine value again. Production would leap beyond what fields or ships could provide. But that's the story for the next episode. When we look back across the long arc, from hunters following herds to farmers building granaries to merchants sailing oceans, one theme keeps returning. Humans have always been asking, how do we create value and how do we make it last? In the extractive age, value came from nature itself. It was resilience through knowledge, memory, and movement. People survived by reading the land, tracking the stars, and sharing obligations through ritual and kindship. It wasn't written down, but it was structured and it worked for tens and thousands of years. In the agricultural age, value shifted to the soil. Surplus allowed specialization, temples and empires, but it also created fragility. Famine, drought, or invasion could also undo centuries of progress. Resilience here meant storage, law, and divine order, systems that convinced people to cooperate on larger scales than ever before. And then in the mercantile age, value moved to the seas. Nations rose and fell on their ability to control routes, build fleets, and finance voyages. The first corporations were born, spreading risk and reward, but resilience was no longer about local harvests. It was about global networks, and once again, not everyone adapted. Some powers clung to the past and declined, while others reinvented themselves and thrived. So, what does this tell us? First, the value creation is never static. What matters in one age becomes irrelevant in the next. A tribe that could track animals starved when crops became the new foundation. An empire built on grain faltered when the ocean routes bypassed its ports. A kingdom rich in silver collapsed when inflation ate it away. Second, that resilience is context dependent. For hunter-gatherers, resilience meant mobility. For farmers, it meant storage and hierarchy. For merchants, it meant fleets and finance. Each form of resilience looked different, but the principle was the same. Those who adapted endured. Those who didn't disappeared. And third, that power always follows value. Shamans held power when knowledge was rare. Pharaohs ruled when grain was the currency. Merchants, bankers, and ship captains rose when trade was the lifeblood. Whoever controls the system of value controls the society. Now let's bring this closer to us. When companies and governments today speak of resilience, they usually mean preparing for shocks, climate change, pandemics, supply chain crises, cyber attacks. And they're right. But I think we should also ask a deeper question. What can we learn from those who came before us? Did hunter-gatherers actually understand resilience better than we do? Living with uncertainty every day, building flexible systems of survival? Did farmers, for all their fragility, teach us the importance of storage, cooperation, and law? Did merchants show us the resilience can scale, but only if we adapt faster than our rivals. These aren't just historical curiosities, they are mirrors. The challenges we face today, scarcity, inequality, climate, technological disruption, all have echoes in the past. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme, and resilience is the rhyme that keeps coming back. And there's one more lesson. Value is not only economic. It is artistic, educational, spiritual, and geographic. It is how humans assign meaning to what matters. When we drew animals on cave walls, when we built ziggurats in Mesopotamia, when we launched ships across oceans, we weren't just feeding bodies, we were feeding imaginations, binding communities, and shaping power. Indra's net from Hindu and Buddhist philosophy imagines the universe as an infinite web of jewels, each reflecting all others. It's a powerful image for value. No single jewel holds the whole, but each is connected, dependent, and reflecting. Just like the economies, just like the societies. And flood myth from Mesopotamia's epic of Gilgamesh, to Noah in the Bible, to stories in India and China, all carry the same theme: destruction followed by renewal, collapse followed by resilience. Humanity starting again. Each economic age has followed that rhythm too. So, as we come to an end to this episode, let's remember resilience is not only about surviving shocks, it's about remembering who we are, what we value, and how we create meaning together. In the next episode, we'll step into the industrial age. Machines will take the place of muscles. Schools will train workers for our factories. Services will rise as goods become cheap, and experiences will become products in themselves. We'll see how value shifted again, from coal and steel to Disneyland and Starbucks. And we'll ask, in a world of abundance, what does resilience mean? Until then, thank you for listening. If this episode sparked something for you, share it, leave a review, or send me your thoughts. And as always, stay curious and peace be with you.